Notice the file has a list of names already used in previous videos. Let me check them carefully before writing. Use names to avoid: Marcus, Courtney, Gary, Theodore, Owen, Sloan, Denise, Raymond, Walter, Christine, Bernard, Harold, Preston, Vivienne, Lorraine, Frank, Nora, Cole, Daniel, Richard, Cho, Lily, Bradley, James, Elaine, Stephanie, Kevin, Robert, Mays, Audrey, Nathan, Gil, Earl, Trent, Melissa, Patricia, Hank Bowman, Caleb, Scarlett, Douglas, Patrice Donovan, Gwen, Warren Allwright, Renee, Victor, Leonard, Aaron, Meg, Claire, Harold Briggs, Sandra, Becca, Drew, Jean Calloway, Trevor, Britt, Pam. My son-in-law had been living in my house for 4 years, and I still didn't know his Wi-Fi password. That's not a metaphor. That's just how he was. Doors closed. Conversations ended. Questions deflected with a half-smile that never reached his eyes. His name was Derek, and for 4 years I told myself I was being too hard on him. That I was one of those fathers-in-law you read about in advice columns. The kind who can never accept that his daughter chose someone he didn't choose for her. I told myself that right up until the Tuesday morning in March when I found my daughter crying in her car in my driveway at 7 a.m., still in yesterday's clothes. Her name is Robin. She's 31. She has her mother's eyes and her mother's stubbornness, which means she doesn't ask for help easily. She doesn't cry in driveways. She doesn't show up at her father's house without calling first. And she certainly doesn't sit in a cold car for God knows how long rather than knock on the door. I'd been up since 5:30. Old habit from 30 years of driving a city bus in Cincinnati. Your body just decides that's when the day starts, and it doesn't ask your opinion. I saw her car from the kitchen window when I went to make my second cup of coffee. I recognized the plates. I stood there for a moment, not sure what I was seeing. Then I put on my coat and went outside. She didn't hear me coming. When I tapped on the window, she flinched so hard she hit her elbow on the steering wheel. Then she saw it was me, and something in her face just fell apart, like she'd been holding it together with her hands this whole time and she finally ran out of strength. I opened the door. She didn't say anything. I didn't either. I just waited. "I didn't want to wake you," she finally said. "I've been up since 5:30. "I know." She wiped her face with her sleeve. "I know you have." I asked her how long she'd been sitting there. She said since about 6, which meant she'd driven over here in the dark, parked in my driveway and sat in a cold car for over an hour rather than knock on my door. That told me more than anything she could have said out loud. I told her to come inside. She didn't tell me everything that morning. She told me some of it, enough for me to understand that things between her and Derek had been bad for a while. Not bad the way arguments are bad, where two people say things they regret and then work through it. Bad the way slow water damage is bad, invisible for years, and then one morning you press your hand against the wall and it goes straight through. She told me he'd taken money from their joint account without telling her. Not once. Repeatedly. She'd found out because she went to pay her car insurance online and the account was $300 short of what it should have been. She'd checked the transaction history. Transfers going back months to an account she didn't recognize. When she asked him about it, he told her she was misreading the statements. He said it in that particular tone he had. Calm, patient, slightly condescending, like he was explaining something obvious to someone not quite bright enough to understand it. She'd questioned herself. She'd gone back and checked again. She'd questioned herself again. That's how long it had been going on. Long enough that she'd started to doubt her own ability to read a bank statement. I kept my voice level. I told her I was glad she came. I made her eggs. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was that I had never fully trusted Derek, and I wished I had done something about that feeling 3 years ago, instead of writing it off as a father's selfishness. She went home that afternoon. She said she wanted to try to work it out. I understood. 28 months of marriage doesn't disappear because of a morning in your father's driveway. I told her I was here whenever she needed me. I hugged her for maybe 30 seconds longer than usual. Then I watched her drive away and went back inside and sat at my kitchen table and thought, I want to be honest about what I did next, because it matters. I didn't immediately start planning anything. I'm not that kind of person. I'm 62 years old. I drove a city bus for 3 decades, and the most dramatic thing I'd done in recent memory was complain to the HOA about the Jensen family's Christmas lights in February. I'm not a schemer. I'm not strategic. I'm a man who drinks too much coffee and watches the Weather Channel and calls his daughter every Sunday. But I'm also a man who pays attention. And over the next several weeks, I paid attention very carefully. Robin called me more. Not every day, but more. Sometimes late, after Derek was asleep, she'd talk about small things. A book she was reading. Something funny that happened at work. But I could hear what was underneath it. The careful choosing of words. The things she didn't say. I also started to notice things I'd been too polite to notice before. I've been retired for 2 years. I live alone. Robin's mother passed away 6 years ago, breast cancer, and I haven't remarried. I have time on my hands, maybe too much. But in this case, that time was useful. Derek worked from home 3 days a week. Their house was about 12 minutes from mine. I drove past it sometimes when I went to the grocery store. Not a detour, just the route I happened to take. And a couple of times on days when Robin was at her office downtown, I noticed a car parked in their driveway I didn't recognize. A silver Honda Civic, always gone before Robin would have been home. I didn't jump to conclusions. I want to be clear about that. I filed it away. Then one Sunday afternoon in April, Robin called me sounding strange. Flat, she said Derek had told her the transfer she'd found wasn't a secret account. It was a business investment he'd been making on both their behalves. A friend's startup. He'd meant to tell her, he just hadn't gotten around to it. He had paperwork to prove it. She wanted to believe him. She asked me what I thought. I asked her if she'd seen the paperwork herself. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said he was going to get it to her. I told her to let me know when she did. She never called back about the paperwork. The thing that changed everything was a conversation I overheard by accident. My neighbor, Phil, he's 70, retired postal worker. The kind of man who knows everyone's business, not because he's nosy, but because he actually talks to people. Phil mentioned one afternoon that he'd seen Derek at the Buffalo Wild Wings on Montgomery Road. Phil had gone there with his grandson to watch a Bengals game. Derek had been at the bar with a woman Phil didn't recognize, and they'd been there a while. Phil wasn't gossiping. He genuinely wasn't sure if it was something I should know. He brought it up gently, the way good people do when they have information that might hurt someone they like. He said, I don't know if that's anything, but you're her father, so. I told him I appreciated it. I drove home and sat in my living room for a long time. I'm going to tell you what I did not do. I did not call Robin. I did not confront Derek. I did not do anything rash or emotional or irreversible. Because by that point, I understood something. This wasn't going to end well on its own, and if I wanted Robin to be able to see clearly, not just believe her father's version of events, but actually see, I needed something she couldn't talk herself out of. I needed proof. Real proof. The kind that doesn't have another explanation. I called my nephew, whose name is Seth. He's 34, works in IT security for a company downtown. I've helped him out over the years, when he needed a co-signer for his first car, when he needed someone to vouch for him during a rough patch. He's a good kid. He didn't ask many questions. I just told him I needed to understand how to document something properly and legally, and that I needed his help. He came over on a Saturday and we talked for 2 hours. He explained what I could and couldn't do legally in Ohio. He told me about apps that could help me organize records. He helped me understand what kinds of evidence would actually matter if things went to a divorce attorney, or, depending on what was happening, law enforcement. I'm not going to describe every detail of what I did over the next 6 weeks. Some of it is still private for Robin's sake, but I'll tell you this. Derek was not careful. People who've been getting away with things for a long time tend not to be. They get comfortable. They get lazy. They start believing that the people around them are too trusting, too confused, or too busy to notice. He was right about 2 of those things. He was wrong about the 3rd. By early June, I had bank records Robin had shared with me annotated carefully. I had a timeline. I had the name of the account the transfers were going to, which was not, as it turned out, a friend's startup. It was an account in Derek's name only, at a different bank than the one they shared, opened 18 months into their marriage. I also had something else. I don't want to say exactly what, because it's Robin's private life. But I'll say that the silver Honda Civic was relevant. Here is what I decided. I was not going to ambush Robin with this information alone. I'd seen enough episodes of people's lives implode to know that when someone is handed proof that their life is not what they thought it was, they need to be in a position to do something with it. They need to have already started to see it themselves. Robin had been starting to see it. The conversations were getting more honest. She'd stopped defending certain things. A few weeks earlier, she'd told me, almost casually, like she was mentioning the weather, that Derek had cancelled their plans to visit his parents again, which meant he'd cancelled them 4 times in a row, always with a different reason. So I asked her to come for dinner. A Sunday, just the 2 of us, like we'd done every few months since her mother died. I'd make her mother's pot roast recipe. We'd sit at the same kitchen table we'd sat at for every important conversation in her life. She said yes. I need to be honest about how I felt that week. I wasn't calm. I drove my bus routes. I still volunteer sometimes with a senior transportation program, and I made wrong turns I haven't made in years. I burned the pot roast the first time I tested the recipe and had to start over. I called Seth twice just to talk. I lay awake Thursday and Friday nights, thinking about what I was about to do and whether I was doing it right and whether it would break something between Robin and me that I couldn't repair. Because here's the thing about being a parent that nobody tells you when they hand you that baby in the hospital. There is no moment at which you stop being terrified of getting it wrong. She was 31 years old, and I was about to sit across from her at a kitchen table and change the shape of her life. And I wasn't sure I had the right. I wasn't sure any father has that right. But I also thought about her sitting in that cold car in the dark for over an hour, too worn down to knock on my own door. And I thought, yes, someone has to. She came on Sunday at 5. She looked tired. She'd been looking tired for months, but I'd gotten used to it the way you get used to things that happen slowly. Seeing her that evening, after weeks of paying very close attention to everything, I saw it more sharply. The way she moved through the doorway, careful, a little hunched, like someone braced for something. The way she smiled at me, and it was genuine and warm and also exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She helped me set the table. We talked about her job. She works in hospital administration, something I'm still not entirely sure I understand, and about a book she'd been reading, and about whether I was eating enough vegetables. Normal things. The kind of conversation that sits on top of the real one like a lid. After dinner, I cleared the plates. I poured 2 cups of coffee. I sat back down. She knew something was coming. She has her mother's instincts. I told her I needed to show her some things, and I needed her to look at all of it before she said anything. She didn't speak. She nodded. I put the folder on the table. I'd organized everything as clearly as I could. Seth had helped me label it. Bank statements with the relevant transfers highlighted. The timeline I'd built, a printout showing the account Derek had been moving money into. His name, his sole ownership. Opened while they were married. She looked at the first page for a long time. I watched her face. She didn't cry. She didn't get angry. She just went very still, the way people do when their body is processing something faster than their mind can catch up to. She turned the pages slowly. She got to the timeline. She stopped on a particular date. I saw her finger trace it, and something shifted in her expression. A recognition, something clicking into place that she had probably already half known but hadn't let herself know fully. She closed the folder. She sat there for a moment. Then she asked me how long I'd known. I told her the truth. I told her I'd had a feeling for a long time, but that I'd been worried about being that father. The one who can't let go. The one who doesn't trust his daughter's choices. I told her I hadn't been certain of anything until recently, and that as soon as I was certain, I needed her to know. She looked at the table. She said very quietly, "I knew some of it." I told her I figured she might. She asked me what I thought she should do. I told her that wasn't my decision, but I told her I had a name of a very good family attorney, a woman I'd gotten from Phil's daughter, who'd been through her own divorce, and that I'd already looked into Ohio divorce law enough to understand that what Derek had been doing with that account potentially qualified as financial misconduct in a divorce proceeding. I told her she had options, real ones. She picked up the folder again. She held it in her lap. She said he'd told me I was imagining things. I told her she wasn't. She said he told me I was bad with money, that I was always getting confused. I told her I knew. She said I started to believe him. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I told her that was the part that made me the most angry, not the money. The money was fixable. What made me angry was that he'd made her doubt herself. That he'd taken a smart, capable woman and spent years slowly convincing her that she couldn't trust her own mind. That was the part I couldn't forgive. She cried then. Not dramatically. Robin doesn't do anything dramatically. She just put her hands over her face for a minute and cried quietly. And I put my hand on her arm and didn't say anything else because there wasn't anything else to say. She called the attorney on Tuesday. She didn't tell Derek she was calling. She came to my house to make the call because she didn't trust that Derek hadn't done something to their home Wi-Fi. Seth had helped her check her phone for anything unusual. She was starting to think like someone protecting herself, which told me she'd already made up her mind even if she hadn't said it out loud yet. The attorney's name was Ms. Okafor. Robin was on the phone with her for almost an hour. I sat in the other room and watched the Weather Channel with the sound off. When Robin came out, she looked different. Not happier, exactly, more solid, like she'd found her footing. She filed 2 weeks later. I want to tell you about the morning Derek called me. It was a Thursday, 9 in the morning. I almost didn't pick up because I didn't recognize the number. He was calling from a different phone. But something made me answer. He was calm at first. He asked if we could talk man to man. He used that phrase, man to man. He used that phrase, man to man, like we were settling something over a handshake that had nothing to do with his wife. I told him we could talk. He said he knew I was the one who'd put things in Robin's head. He said I'd never liked him, which was partially true, and that I'd been poisoning her against him for years, which was not. He said the money in that account was for a surprise. That he'd been saving up to take her on a trip for their 3rd anniversary, and he hadn't told her because it was supposed to be a surprise. I let him finish. Then I told him the account had been opened 18 months ago. Their 3rd anniversary would have been this September. That was 16 months away when he opened it. I told him that was a long time to start saving for a surprise. He was quiet. I told him I didn't have any interest in making his life difficult. I told him what I had an interest in was my daughter having accurate information about the life she was living, and that I hadn't given her anything she hadn't already started to figure out on her own. I told him if he had anything he wanted Robin to know, he should tell her attorney. He hung up. I sat there for a minute. Then I finished my coffee. The divorce took about 8 months. Ohio has a 90-day waiting period, and there were some back-and-forth negotiations about the financial stuff that I won't get into because it's Robin's business, not mine. But the financial misconduct documentation mattered. It mattered enough that Derek's attorney advised him to settle rather than go to trial. Robin moved into an apartment about 3 miles from my house in November. It's a nice place. 2nd floor, good light, a little balcony where she puts plants. I helped her move. We carried boxes up a flight of stairs on a Saturday morning, And at some point she said, "Dad, you're 62. And I told her I'd been carrying things for 62 years and I could manage a box of kitchen stuff. She laughed. A real one. I haven't heard that laugh in a while. People sometimes ask me, usually people who know some version of the story, whether I feel bad about any of it. Whether I overstepped, whether it was my place. I think about that question honestly because I think it deserves an honest answer. I didn't fabricate anything. I didn't manipulate anyone. I gathered information that was accurate, and I presented it to my daughter in a setting where she was safe and had time to process it. I let her make her own decisions. She made them. Do I wish I'd noticed sooner? Yes. I spent about a year telling myself I was being too hard on Derek, too protective, too unwilling to let my daughter live her own life. And some of that self-correction was right. I did need to check my instincts. I did need to make sure I wasn't projecting. But some of it cost her time she spent doubting herself. I wish I'd found the balance sooner. Do I think fathers have a right to intervene in their adult children's lives? No, not as a rule. Robin is 31 years old. She is smarter than I am in most of the ways that matter, but I also think there's a difference between intervening and paying attention. Between imposing your version of events and making sure someone you love has accurate information. That difference matters. I'll tell you what I know for certain. She was sitting in a cold car in my driveway in the dark for over an hour because she had been living with someone who made her feel like she couldn't trust what she saw and heard and knew. And now she's on a second-floor apartment with good light and the balcony and plants. That's what I know. Last Sunday she came for dinner. We had the pot roast again. The real version this time, not the burned test run. She brought a bottle of wine, which I told her was unnecessary, and she said, "I know, Dad," in the tone she's been using since she was 15. That means she's going to do what she wants regardless of what I say. We sat at the same table. We talked about her job and a show she'd been watching, and whether I was eating enough vegetables, which is apparently going to be a recurring theme in my retirement. At some point I asked her how she was. Not small talk, how are you? Actually how she was. She thought about it for a minute. She said, "I feel like myself again." That's everything, really. That's the whole story. I'm 62 years old. I drove a city bus for 30 years. I'm not interesting or dramatic or particularly wise, but I love my daughter, and I pay attention, and sometimes that turns out to be enough. I've thought a lot about what the word patient actually means. Most people use it to describe waiting without complaining, sitting in a doctor's office, stuck in traffic, tolerating something uncomfortable until it passes. But I think real patience is different from that. Real patience is active. It's watching carefully, while other people assume you're not watching at all. It's building something, slowly, quietly, without announcing it, while the person causing the damage assumes the world is still tilted in their favor. Derek assumed I was just a retired bus driver who watched the Weather Channel and didn't ask hard questions. He wasn't entirely wrong about the Weather Channel, but he misread everything else. And that's the thing about people who operate the way he did. They count on the people around them being too polite, too confused, or too emotionally invested to act clearly. They use your love against you. They use your desire to believe the best about the people your children chose. They understood, maybe better than I did at first, that a father's instinct to not interfere is actually a very useful tool for someone who needs the interference to stop. Robin spent 2 years doubting herself because one person told her over and over in 100 small ways that she couldn't trust what she saw. That's not an accident. That's a method, and what it requires. What it absolutely depends on is that no one around the target is paying close enough attention to hand them back their own reality. I was paying attention, eventually. The truth is, I should have trusted my instincts sooner. I spent almost a year writing off what I noticed because I was afraid of being wrong in a particular way. The way that makes a father look controlling, jealous of his daughter's life, unable to let go. That fear cost her time. I don't say that to punish myself, but I say it clearly because it's true and because I think it matters. The instinct to check yourself, to make sure you're being fair, is good. But it can be turned into a trap if you're not careful. There's a difference between checking your instincts and silencing them entirely. What I know now, what this whole thing taught me in a way I didn't expect, is that wisdom isn't about knowing things other people don't know. It's about being willing to act on what you already know, even when acting is uncomfortable, even when it costs you something, even when you're not completely sure you have the right. I wasn't sure I had the right. I acted anyway, and I tried to act in a way that gave Robin her own power back, rather than replacing one person making decisions for her with another person making decisions for her. That part mattered to me more than anything. I didn't want to rescue her. I wanted to make sure she could rescue herself. She did. She's in her apartment with the good light and the plants on the balcony. She laughs like herself again. She trusts what she sees and hears and knows. That's not something I gave her. She always had it. I just made sure someone didn't succeed in taking it away permanently. There's a kind of quiet satisfaction in that. Not triumph. Not pride, exactly. Just the feeling of having done the one thing you were actually supposed to do, in the way it was supposed to be done, at the cost it needed to cost. That's enough for me.